She was about to lose everything over a piece of silver she never should have touched, but the truth behind it would bring a billionaire to his knees. Rain hammered the tin roof of the roadside Pearl Diner, the kind of small-town rain that turned gravel lots into rivers and sent every trucker within 10 miles ducking indoors for coffee. Naomi Wells wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, her feet aching inside shoes that had seen better decades, her mind doing the quiet arithmetic it always did near the end of shift. Rent, her mother's medication, the community college tuition she kept promising herself she'd save for next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. She didn't notice the black SUV pull into the lot. She didn't notice the man who stepped out of it, tall, gray-suited, moving like someone used the room's parting for him. What she noticed was a bell above the door slamming against the glass as he shoved it open, and the way every conversation in the diner died at once. Benjamin Ashford had not slept more than 3 hours a night in 91 days. 91 days since his daughter Lily vanished from a parking garage 2 blocks from her college dorm, leaving behind a dropped phone, a scattered coffee cup, and nothing else. 91 days of private investigators, sleepless calls to the FBI, and a growing, suffocating certainty that he would never see her again. He had followed a lead to this forgotten stretch of highway, a second-hand tip about a car matching a description. Nothing more. Another dead end in a parade of them. And then he saw it. A flash of silver on the wrist of the waitress pouring coffee 3 tables down. A thin bracelet, engraved with small looping vine pattern. A single sapphire chip at its clasp. He knew that bracelet. He had picked out himself in a jewelry shop in Geneva for Lily's 16th birthday. He had watched the jeweler engrave it. He had fastened around his daughter's wrist himself and kissed her forehead and told her she'd always be his little girl, no matter how old she got. "Where," Benjamin said, his voice cutting to the diner like a blade, "did you get that bracelet?" Naomi turned, startled, coffee pot still in hand. "Excuse me." He crossed the room in 4 strides and seized her wrist before she could pull away, turning it toward the fluorescent light with a violence that made her gasp. "This bracelet. Tell me where you got it. Tell me right now. Or I swear to God I will have you arrested before you finish your shift." "Let go of me." Naomi wrenched her arm back, more startled than hurt, her heart slamming against her ribs. Around them, the diner had gone utterly silent, forks frozen halfway to mouths, an old trucker halfway out his booth like he might intervene. "That bracelet belonged to my daughter," Benjamin said, and something in his voice cracked despite himself. Not just fury now, but something raw underneath it. "She's been missing for 3 months. If you had anything to do with—" "I didn't steal anything from anyone," Naomi said, and to his surprise, her voice didn't shake. It went low and steady, the voice of someone who had learned long ago that panic never helped. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. But you want to stand in my mother's diner and accuse me of being a thief in front of everyone I work with. Then explain it," Benjamin snapped. "Explain how a bracelet I bought in Switzerland for my daughter ended up on your wrist in the middle of nowhere." The diner held its breath. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pan hissed and was ignored. Naomi looked down at the bracelet, the one she had promised, only 10 days ago, to keep safe until its owner was strong enough to wear it again. And she looked back up at this stranger, this desperate, furious, broken man standing in her mother's diner soaked from the rain, and something in her chest softened even as her pride refused to bend. "Sit down," she said quietly. "Sit down, and I'll tell you exactly how I got it. But you're not going to like how close you came to walking right past the answer you've been looking for." Benjamin stared at her, behind the anger in his eyes. Something else flickered to life. A terror he hadn't let himself feel in weeks. The terror of hope. 2 weeks ago, Naomi began, pulling out the chair across him with hands that had gone very still, "I found a girl behind this diner who couldn't remember her own name." What Naomi found in the mud that night wasn't a stranger. It was a secret that would unravel a billionaire's entire world. Benjamin sat frozen, rain dripping from his suit jacket onto the diner's cracked linoleum, every muscle in his body coiled tight. "Keep talking," he said. "Now." Naomi folded her hands on the table, steadying herself, and let the memory pull her back to that night. It had been just past midnight, the diner locked up, the parking lot empty except for her mother's old sedan. Naomi had gone out back to toss a bag of trash into the dumpster when she heard it, a small, broken sound, half-breath, half-sob, coming from the shadows near the propane tanks. She almost hadn't looked. She almost told herself it was a cat, or the wind, or nothing at all. But something made her step closer. Phone flashlight raised with shaking hand, and there, curled against the cold brick wall, was a young woman, barefoot, filthy, shivering so hard her teeth clattered. A gash above her eyebrow had dried into a dark, crusted line, and her wrist bore faint red marks, like something had once been bound too tight around them. "Please," the girl had whispered, flinching back into the wall as the light hit her. "Please don't call anyone. Please don't call the police." Naomi should have called someone. Every instinct of common sense told her to. But there was something in the girl's eyes, not the wild look of someone dangerous, but the hollowed-out look of someone who had already survived something unspeakable and was terrified of what came next. "Okay," Naomi had said softly, crouching down slowly, palms open. "Okay, nobody's calling anyone. I'm Naomi. What's your name?" The girl's face crumpled. I don't know. I can't remember. I can't remember anything." Naomi had helped at her feet that night, wrapped her own jacket around trembling shoulders, and walked to the 6 blocks to the small house she shared with her mother, praying the whole way that she wasn't making the worst mistake of her life. Grace Wells, Naomi's mother, was a nurse who had worked double shifts at the county hospital for 11 years, and when her daughter walked to the front door supporting a barefoot stranger with a bleeding head wound, she didn't ask a single question before she went straight for her medical bag. "We should report this," Grace had murmured to Naomi in the kitchen, out of earshot, while she cleaned the gash above the girl's eyebrow. A missing woman, an injury like this, someone out there could be desperate to find her. "She's terrified, Mom," Naomi whispered back, genuinely terrified, not of us, of something else. "Give her a few days. Let her feel safe first. Then we'll figure out the right thing to do." Grace had looked at her daughter for a long moment, the same look she'd given her since Naomi was small, the look that said you had too big a heart for this harder world. And then she nodded, because Grace Wells had never in her life turned away someone who needed help, no matter what it cost her. They gave the girl the guest room. They gave her clean clothes, warm meals, patience with the silences and the sudden flashes of panic that overtook her without warning. Naomi worked double diner shifts to cover the extra groceries, and never once complained. Grace treated her wounds, and more than that, treated her like she mattered, like she wasn't a burden or a mystery to be solved, but a person deserving of gentleness. Slowly, the girl grew steadier. She started sleeping through the night. She started once or twice, almost smiling, but her memory stayed a locked door, offering only fragments. The smell of rain on marble floors, a man's voice calling her Lily Bear, the shape of a house she couldn't place. "She wore this bracelet when I found her," Naomi said now, looking up at Benjamin, whose face had gone the color of ash. She wouldn't take it off, even a shower. She said it was the only thing that felt like it belonged to her. 10 days ago, she asked me to hold on to it for safekeeping while she stayed at a women's shelter 2 towns over. She wanted to get proper help, professional help, somewhere safe while she tried to remember who she was. She made me promise I'd keep it until she was ready to wear it again. Benjamin's hands were shaking now, no longer from fury, but from something that felt like the floor dropping out beneath him. "What does she look like?" he whispered. "Tell me exactly what she looks like." Naomi told him. Dark hair, a small scar near her left ear from a childhood bicycle accident, a habit of touching her collarbone when she was nervous. Benjamin Ashford, who had not cried once in 91 days of searching, put his head in his hands at the diner table and wept. "That's my daughter," he said, the words breaking apart in his throat. "That's Lily. That's my little girl." A father's fury had turned to desperate hope, but the woman he'd wrongly accused was about to give him back everything he thought he'd lost. The diner had gone utterly silent, except for the sound of rain and Benjamin's ragged breathing. Naomi sat across from him, watching the most powerful man to ever walk through that door dissolve into something achingly human. Just a father, terrified and broken, clinging to a thread of hope he barely dared to believe. "I am so sorry," Benjamin said, lifting his head, his eyes red-rimmed. "I grabbed you. I accused you in front of everyone you work with. I looked at you and saw a thief because of nothing, because you're a waitress in a diner, and I decided that meant something about your character. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I don't know how to begin apologizing for it." Naomi studied him for a moment. She had every right to stay angry. His hand had left a faint red mark on her wrist. His words had humiliated her in front of regulars she'd known for years. But she had also just watched a father learn in real time that his missing daughter might still be alive, and something in her simply couldn't hold on to the anger anymore. "You were scared," she said quietly. "Scared people do foolish things. I forgive you, but right now none of that matters. What matters is getting you to your daughter." She pulled out her phone and gave him the name of the shelter. Hawthorne House, a women's crisis shelter 40 minutes north, a place that specialized in trauma recovery and had a strict policy of protecting the identities of the women in its care. "They won't just let you walk in," Naomi warned. "They're careful, and they should be. A lot of the women there are hiding from someone dangerous. You'll need to go through proper channels." Benjamin was already dialing. Within 20 minutes, his head of security and 2 private investigators who had spent 91 days chasing false leads across 4 states were on speakerphone. And within the hour, calls had gone out to the shelter's director, to local police, to a family attorney who could verify Benjamin's identity and relationship to Lily Ashford beyond any doubt. "I want you there," Benjamin said suddenly, looking at Naomi. "When I see her, if it's really her, she trusted you. She stayed in your home. I don't want her first moment of clarity to be a stranger's face, even if that stranger's her own father. I want someone she trusts standing there too." Naomi hesitated only a second before nodding. She untied her apron, called to her manager that she'd be back, and climbed into the back of Benjamin's SUV beside a man who, 3 hours earlier, had accused her of theft, and who was now gripping the door handle like a man holding on to the edge of a cliff. The drive to Hawthorne House felt endless. Benjamin talked without meaning to, filling the silence with fragments of Lily. How she used to run to him after piano recitals with her hair coming undone from its ribbon. How she wanted to study art history and travel to Florence. How the last thing he'd said to her before she vanished was a rushed, "Not now, honey," about a phone call he could barely remember, and how he would give every cent of his fortune to go back and say something, anything kinder. Naomi listened without judgment. She understood, more than most, what it meant to love someone so much that fear turned you into someone you didn't recognize. When they arrived, the shelter director met them at the door, her expression carefully neutral, professionally guarded. "We have a resident who matches the description you gave us," she said. "She's agreed to see you, but I need to be clear. Her memory is still fragmented, and she may not recognize you right away. Please, for her sake, go slowly." Benjamin nodded, unable to speak. They led him down a quiet hallway to a small sitting room with soft lighting and a window overlooking a garden. A young woman sat in an armchair near the window, dark hair pulled back, a small scar visible near her left ear, one hand resting absently at her collarbone. She looked up as the door opened. For a long moment, her face was blank, searching, uncertain. Then her eyes moved past Benjamin to Naomi, standing just behind him, and something in her expression cracked open with relief. "Naomi," she breathed, and then her gaze slid back to Benjamin, and her whole body went very still, her breath catching, her hand rising slowly to her mouth. "Dad," she whispered, the word coming out cracked and disbelieving, like something surfacing from very deep water. "Dad, is that really you?" Benjamin crossed the room in 3 unsteady strides and dropped to his knees in front of her chair, gathering his daughter into his arms as she began to sob against his shoulder. 91 days of terror finally breaking apart into something that at last resembled relief. Lily was finally home, but the pieces of her memory beginning to surface would reveal a betrayal no one saw coming. For a long while, no one in the small sitting room said anything at all. Benjamin held his daughter, as though letting go might make her disappear again, and Lily clung to him with the same desperate grip, both of them shaking, both of them crying without any attempt to hide it. Naomi stood quietly by the door, watching, her own eyes stinging. This was not her family, not her reunion, but she had carried a piece of the story for 2 weeks now, and watching it reach its resolution felt like watching a held breath finally release. "I'm sorry," Lily kept saying over and over into her father's shoulder. I'm sorry. I couldn't remember. I didn't know how to find you. I didn't even know my own name. Don't, Benjamin said, pulling back just enough to hold her face in his hands, studying her like he needed to memorize every detail all over again. Don't you dare apologize. None of this was your fault. None of it. Do you understand me? The shelter's director gently suggested they move to a more private room, and a trauma counselor who had been working with Lily for the past 10 days joined them, explaining carefully that memory recovery after severe trauma was often nonlinear. It could return in disjointed pieces, sometimes triggered by smells, sounds, or emotional safety, and pressuring it rarely helped. Take your time, the counselor told Lily gently. There's no rush now. You're safe. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes, and for the first time since Naomi had found her shivering behind the diner, she looked something like peaceful. She kept one hand wrapped around her father's, and with the other, she reached for the bracelet Naomi had carried in her coat pocket the entire drive. Can I? Lily started, and Naomi was already holding out to her. It's yours, Naomi said softly. It was always yours. I only kept it safe. Lily fastened it around her wrist with trembling fingers, and something about the familiar weight of it seemed to loosen a thread somewhere deep in her memory. Her eyes went distant for a moment. There was a parking garage, she said slowly, testing the words like stepping onto unfamiliar ice. I was walking to my car. My phone rang, and I answered it without looking. I thought it was you, Dad. You've been trying to reach me about dinner. Her breath caught. It wasn't you. It was a voice I didn't recognize, and then someone grabbed me from behind before I could even scream. Benjamin's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her continue at her own pace. There was a van, Lily went on, her voice growing steadier even as her hands trembled. I remember being terrified and cold, and there were two men, and one of them kept checking his phone like he was waiting for instructions, like someone else was in charge. I remember being moved more than once. And I remember, she stopped, her brow furrowing hard, as though straining against a locked door in her own mind. I remember a voice on speakerphone, familiar, someone I trusted, giving orders. Who? Benjamin asked, careful to keep his voice gentle despite the dread creeping up his spine. Sweetheart, do you remember who? Lily shook her head, frustrated tears springing to her eyes. I can't. It's right there, Dad. I can almost hear it, but I can't. It's okay, the counselor interjected softly. This is real progress. Please, don't force it. Let it come naturally. Lily nodded, breathing slowly, and Benjamin pulled her back into his arms, his mind already racing to the small, trusted circle of people who had known his schedule, his security routines, his daughter's habits well enough to orchestrate something like this. A voice she trusted, someone giving orders, someone close. Across the room, Naomi watched Benjamin's expression shift from relief into something colder and more focused, the look of a man beginning to realize that the person responsible for his family's nightmare might not be a stranger at all, but someone who had sat across from him at boardroom tables, someone who had shaken his hand and called him a friend. Victor, Benjamin murmured, almost to himself, so quietly no one else caught it. Oh, God, Victor. The name buried in Lily's shattered memory belonged to someone who had sat at Benjamin's own dinner table, and betrayal would cut deeper than anyone imagined. Victor Caldwell had been Benjamin Ashford's business partner for 14 years. He had stood beside Benjamin at his wedding. He had been the first person Benjamin called when Lily was born, and one of the few people trusted enough to know the private codes to the family's estate security system. He had sat in Benjamin's study countless nights, glass of scotch in hand, commiserating over market downturns and toasting the successes, a man Benjamin had never once thought to doubt. But over the past 91 days, something had nagged quietly at the edge of Benjamin's grief. Small inconsistencies he'd been too devastated to examine closely. Victor's insistence, early on, that they keep the investigation low-key to avoid spooking the kidnappers. Victor's sudden, urgent need to finalize a major merger just weeks after Lily disappeared. A merger that required Benjamin's controlling shares to be temporarily transferred into a joint holding account for stability, given everything you're going through. Victor's oddly specific knowledge, during a candlelight vigil for Lily, of exactly which parking garage camera had malfunctioned that night, a detail the police hadn't released publicly. Benjamin had dismissed all of it in his grief and exhaustion. Now, sitting in that small shelter room with his daughter trembling in his arms, the pieces slammed together with sickening clarity. "I need make some calls," Benjamin told Lily gently, kissing her forehead. "I promise I'm not leaving you. I just need 5 minutes." He stepped into the hallway, hands shaking now for an entirely different reason, and called his head of security. "I want every financial transaction Victor Caldwell has made in the last 4 months," he said, his voice low and hard as steel. "I want his phone records. I want to know who he's been calling and where his money's been moving. Tonight, I don't care what it costs." It took less than 18 hours to unravel 14 years of trust. Victor had been quietly bleeding the company dry for over a year, covering catastrophic personal debts from a string of failed investments, and facing exposure and ruin once the company's annual audit came due. Kidnapping Lily had never been about ransom money. It had been about buying time and leverage, using Benjamin's grief and desperation to push through the merger and quietly funnel controlling interest into shell companies Victor controlled, planning to disappear entirely once the transfer was finalized and Benjamin was too broken to notice until it was far too late. He had hired 2 men through an intermediary, men with no connection to him on paper, to abduct Lily and hold her somewhere remote until financial maneuvering was complete. The plan had begun to fall apart the moment Lily managed to escape during a transfer between locations, injured and disoriented, stumbling for miles through unfamiliar countryside until she collapsed behind a small roadside diner. The one place, out of pure chance, where 2 strangers chose kindness over suspicion. When federal agent arrived at Victor Caldwell's estate at dawn with a warrant, they found him already packing a bag, a private jet fueled, and waiting at a regional airstrip 40 minutes away. He did not deny it once confronted with the financial records and the testimony beginning to surface from the 2 men in custody, both of whom had already agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Victor simply stared at Benjamin across a police station interview room, through the glass, and said nothing at all, no apology, no explanation, nothing but the hollow, calculating silence of a man who had never once seen his best friend's daughter as anything more than an instrument. Benjamin stood outside that station for a long time afterward, staring up at gray morning sky, feeling something complicated settle in his chest. Not triumph, not even relief exactly, but a kind of grim, exhausted closure. His daughter was safe. His enemy was in custody. And somewhere in the wreckage of the past 3 months, he had learned a harder truth than either of those things, that the people you trust with everything can betray you completely, while a stranger with nothing to gain can save your entire world. The story that began with a false accusation in a small diner would end with a promise that changed lives forever. 6 months passed. The roadside Pearl Diner looked much the same from the outside. The same cracked parking lot, the same flickering neon sign, the same bell above the door that still stuck a little when it rained. But inside, something had shifted in ways the regulars still talked about over their morning coffee. Naomi Wells no longer worked double shifts out of desperation. She had cut back to weekends only, spending her weekdays instead in university lecture halls, working toward the pre-med degree she'd shelved years earlier when her mother's health scare had drained their savings and made college feel like an impossible luxury. Tuition, books, even a small stipend for living expenses, all of it now covered in full, quietly and without fanfare, through a scholarship fund that had appeared in her name the same week Lily Ashford returned home. Benjamin Ashford had not simply repaid a debt and walked away. In the months following Victor's arrest and the long, difficult process of rebuilding both his company and his daughter's sense of safety, he had found himself returning again and again to a single realization. The 2 people who saved his daughter's life had nothing to gain and everything to lose by helping a frightened stranger, and they had done it anyway, without hesitation, without asking a single question about what was in it for them. He established the Lily Grace Foundation that spring, named for his daughter and for Grace Wells, the nurse who had cared for Lily's wounds without expecting so much as a thank you. The foundation's mission was simple and deeply personal, funding shelters and trauma recovery programs for survivors of violence and abduction, expanding access to the kind of quiet, patient, dignified care that had given Lily the safety she needed to begin healing, and offering scholarships to caregivers, nurses, and everyday people whose compassion too often went unrewarded and unseen. Grace Wells, after 30 years of double shifts and exhausted nights, finally reduced her hours at the county hospital, taking on a role instead as a consulting advisor for the Foundation's care programs, helping design exactly the kind of trauma-informed support she'd instinctively offered Lily on pure instinct and a nurse's steady hands. Lily herself had thrown herself into recovery with a determination that astonished everyone who watched it. Her memories had returned slowly but steadily in the months since Victor's arrest, and rather than let the experience harden her, she had chosen instead to volunteer at Hawthorne House, the very shelter that had given her safety, sitting with newly arrived women in their first frightened days the way Naomi had once sat with her. "You gave me my daughter back," Benjamin told Naomi one evening, months later, standing once more in the diner where it had all begun, though this time there was no rain, no fury, no accusation, only quiet gratitude. "I walked into this diner ready to destroy you over a piece of jewelry, and instead you handed me back everything that mattered. I don't know how a man repays something like that." "You already have," Naomi said, glancing around the diner, repainted now, the roof no longer leaking, a small plaque near the door commemorating the Lily Grace Foundation's first year. "But if you really want to know the truth, Mr. Ashford, you didn't just repay us. You reminded me why I wanted to become a doctor in the first place. Not for money. For this. For moments like the one behind this diner, when someone needed help and it didn't matter who they were or where they came from." Benjamin smiled, the first easy, unguarded smile Naomi had seen on him since that stormy night. "Then I'd say," he said, "that this diner owes its whole story to a bracelet, a rainstorm, and a waitress who refused to let fear win." Outside, the sun was setting gold over the highway, over the same gravel lot where a desperate father had once stormed and ready to destroy a stranger's life, never imagining that the woman he'd wronged would become the reason his family was whole again. It was, in the end, exactly as Grace Wells liked to say to every frightened new arrival who walked through Hawthorne House's doors. You never know whose life you're saving when you choose kindness over suspicion. Sometimes it saves your own.